so here we are, Kingdom of Heaven, turn 4, starting it off. I've already set up the various pieces, replacements, mustering, etc. You can see the Christian dead pool is kind of growing. The Muslim one isn't tiny either. We've got a few pieces still left in there, but the Christians regain their pieces much more slowly, and we also have a couple of Crusader pieces in there that just can't come back, along with leaders. Both the leaders that were lost could come back. The Christian one can't because they never produced 2 resource points. And the Muslim one, well, he's a good leader, there's no question. 2-2-3 means he can lead 3 units, activation on a 2. But this guy's just a little bit better. And, you know, frankly, if you got choices between a couple of leaders, yeah, you could bring the other guy along for his combat value. He's worth it for that. But if you don't combine them, there's not really a lot of advantage because there's a real limit to how many cards you can play, and each card activates 1 leader. It might provide you with some more strategic options to have leaders around elsewhere on the board. But for the most part, this is a game where you take one thing in a turn, pretty much, one big thing. In the First Crusade, we saw a much more fluid campaign, I think. Certainly when I played with my wife, we did. Well, and you didn't see that, so I did. Where they just really charged down rather rapidly. She was playing the Crusaders there and left a lot of stuff unconquered initially. I was more patient in my advances. In both cases, I think the Muslims won. But with this one, there's not really this desire, need, requirement to grab anything too far from you. That's why you don't see, you know, the Fatimids charging up to Jerusalem. As long as the Muslims can keep the Crusaders below 25 and themselves above whatever it is they need to win. Yeah, whatever their magic number is, which is, looks like it's 9. They're a little above it right now. As long as they can maintain most of their alliance, they're in okay shape. Now we do have a big Crusader force coming in for the next couple turns, though. For half the game, basically. But it's got a problem. When it crosses into Anatolia, it's going to take more extreme attrition losses, presumably, than one normally does with a movement there. They've got good leaders. Louis VII, at least, is good. Conrad's not too impressive, but he can be stacked under Louis. So Louis is now the main leader, which means we've got tied strategy ratings between the 2 powers. And the Crusaders win those ties, so they're going to have the initiative now and have to go first. Actions open up with the Crusaders, I think it was. Playing a card, Lightning Campaign, they're not going to be able to use 2-point activation, trying to activate the Crusader force. Okay, that big thing. Muslims play a Crusader delayed, or Crusade delayed. That keeps them in Constantinople without the activation. And then they played a 2-point cost of their own to charge out to Aleppo and lay siege to that. Now they made a request over here for a surrender. Again, needed a 6 because of the low troop strength, and didn't get it. But they're planning on taking it, so they set themselves up for that siege. They've got only a 4 resistance factor. The problem is that they're kind of close to a little bit of an army here, 4 strength points. Wow, did they make that call or not? 2, 4, 6, 8. That was half the strength. They wouldn't have made the call for surrender. It was a low chance thing. They had no chance of succeeding, so they wouldn't have made it. Alright, so that's their position right now. Now we're back on the Crusader turn. After a series of siege cards, including 2 epidemics, both of which were played by the Crusaders but spread back into their camp. They didn't cause any damage to them. They caused a couple of step losses to the Muslims. Aleppo has fallen, And that changes the victory point situation significantly, 14 to 21. The Crusaders really need the Crusading army to come forward. It's making its way forward, but not in good health. It took some serious attrition losses moving through Anatolia and these mountain spaces. The Muslims play a Crusaders Go Home card, which sent another unit, not to the dead pile, but and not that it matters much, but in this case over to the box. The Crusaders then played Manuel. The first nurse is the Emperor Conrad. They got a success, which means Manuel shows up here with, and he's a good leader, a 1 leader, which is something they really needed, with some 4 additional Byzantine forces, and Byzantium becomes pro-Christian, and Conrad's going to be off the map, but he shows up on the force pool on the turn after next, which in this case is going to be down in turn 6. He's going to show up, but that's okay. They have almost, they're going to have to leave some of the Crusader forces behind, just 1 unit. But otherwise, we've got our better leader in place anyway, and we've taken enough losses between the attrition and the cards that were played to be able to kind of take advantage of that. Crusaders were lower on cards, so they took a vassal move to position themselves up here at Alexandretta. The Saracens moved forward into Gaston, called for it to surrender. It did not, so the little penalties there. They opened up a siege on it. They don't have much in the way of cards, but then what they did to play this was the Messenger intercepted, which got rid of the Crusader cards. So now all the Crusader can do is vassal moves. And they continue to reinforce Alexandretta. I'm not sure how much good that does. The Saracens played Greek medicine instead of trying for the siege there. And they could have drawn a card for a random siege event, but instead they took a couple of step points back. You notice Aleppo is empty of troops. That's kind of risky, but not really, because there was nothing that could be done to seize it, especially with this big army here. So far we're not seeing the shadowing role coming into effect. That was really, really effective and impressive in the couple times I played the First Crusade. But here, there's not that desire to push very far. The Crusaders have it. They have to cross Anatolia, but there's nothing in their way. And after demobilization, that pushes us into turn 5. Not a lot moving. It's going to be tough for the Crusaders here, I think. They're just so far behind in the victory point totals that I don't think they're going to make up the ground that they wanted to and needed to. Right now they have to take 2 locations, basically, as far as I can see. Damascus, Aleppo, maybe Edessa. These are the only ways they can get their score up. That looks plausible. Okay, so new troops have been placed, and the Crusaders were able to get Theobald and a bunch of troops together here at Alexandretta, making it easier for Louis to come forward and gather him up. Likewise, we have Manuel back here. For the Seljuks, it was tougher because they can't place in Aleppo. Now remember, I think Aleppo is fairly safe. If you look at the terrain, you can't cut right across here, so you've got to kind of shoot around or shoot around through territory that they own. So I feel somewhat safe about leaving it out there, especially with an army in place here. Now, it does mean that I have to kind of gather the forces, and that costs cards, but I can use low-cost cards to do that. The big thing for me is to take Gaston so that I can push forward and continue on perhaps against Antioch. But I don't think I can reasonably expect to take Antioch. So this is kind of a dangerous position. I was hoping to capture it and provide myself with a little bit more defense as the Seljuks. For the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Baldwin has moved himself into a position where he's pretty close to being able to strike Damascus. That could be a real threat here. Of course, it takes card plays, and the big armies over here and here, and I want to gather that up and use it to take Aleppo. So, you know, there's always these choices. Well, where do I want to campaign? Where do I not want to campaign? If I don't campaign in the Aleppo in the north, well, maybe then Antioch will fall. So that's kind of a threat. It all depends on what cards I end up in hand for different people. It's just like Manuel. Do I want to bring him in? Well, he's cheap, so maybe I can bring him in with some other cards. He doesn't have to pay the attrition cost for moving into Anatolia. So far, the Fatimids have done nothing except add their 5 victory points. They've joined this great jihad of Zengis. By this point, I think we should have already seen Nur al-Din show up, but so far the card only ended up in the Crusaders' hands. It's kind of funny, the two, the murder of Zengi and the Conrad Goes Sick card are both things that the person who owns that power probably kind of wants to play. The Conrad Goes Sick is a little harder to justify because you do remove the leader from the board for a while. He's not a bad leader. He had some military rating. It's actually kind of an interesting thing. Louis seems too good militarily, but then you compare, and Manuel and Zengi are, you know, both 3s. Baldwin is a pretty good leader though, and he's only a 3. So Louis really kind of didn't do anything of note in the whole Crusades. And he led the Crusader army. I mean, he's the guy who marched into Damascus and then marched his army over to where there was no water to hide and then left without succeeding in the siege. The Christians opened up with an active subordinate, allowing them to move 2 forces, one of which was the main Crusader army under Louis, which didn't have to pay an attrition roll because it's crossing just a mountain pass. That affects attrition, but it doesn't cause a roll. And they've gathered their main army here, ready to move forward. Now this is a big threat on Zengi. And then Baldwin used the other action to go siege Damascus. Now that he couldn't declare for surrender on it. It's a fairly high number. So it doesn't look to me like he can take both cities this turn, probably. Hard to tell. Depends on what happens here, of course. And for the Muslims, they moved a couple of their cav, one into Aleppo to help defend it, and another one up to join the force. They think they've got a good hand for combat. Maybe they can do a shadowing to pull back to Aleppo. Whatever they do, they think they've got a good chance of affecting the Crusaders there. So they just feel more comfortable with it. Well, Louis launched his attack, and I've got to roll an attrition roll for that attack. Across the mountain pass, destroyed Zengi's army, captured Zengi, who's down here, which causes a problem. Because you see, I have this event, Zengi assassinated. He gets replaced by Nur al-Din. I was considering playing that anyway because of the better leader, but I certainly don't want to use a card up and replace him in prison. However, that's what it seems to imply. Of course, if Zengi was already dead, would that imply that I couldn't have Nur al-Din? I don't know. That seems like one of those kind of tricky things, and I feel like I should be able to bring him into play somehow, either while Zengi's a prisoner, or if he's dead, rather than leaving Zengi in place. And I'm not sure it makes sense that I wouldn't be able to. Anyway, our Crusaders under Louis have laid siege to Aleppo. After having brushed the troops aside, they also picked up the diplomatic advantage marker, which doesn't seem to do much. We had a lot of combat cards played. Christians played Vassal's Desert, got rid of a couple of steps before the battle. The Muslims played Christian Impetuosity, which gave a benefit to the attack. But they had tried to do a shadowing roll. They needed a 5 or a 6 to get out of there successfully and cause some attrition, and kind of a risky maneuver overall. Anyway, they probably should have just broken the siege and moved into Aleppo. As it stands, now the Crusaders are sitting sieging two cities that, if they get them both, they pretty much got the win nailed down, I think. We'll see. If you remember a little bit earlier, I mentioned about Louis parking his troops where there was no water. Well, the defense car advantage to the Zengi assassinated is a poor water supply. So I did that. That caused a second attrition roll, and it increased the resistance factor of the city to make it unlikely that the Crusaders will take both in one turn. They may not take either. A bunch of siege actions have been taken, reducing Damascus to that. It would have been an assault last turn, or last Crusader play, except there was a storms card played, or heavy rain, which, storms, which prevented an assault from being made, even though the siege cards can be played. See, the Fatimids during this time have moved up and laid siege to Jerusalem. Now that's got a resistance factor of 5. With one card, I don't think there's much likelihood of it falling, but it does put some additional pressure on the Crusaders. Of course, if they clear Damascus, they can Baldwin can march back down, defeat the Fatimids, which will be reduced due to the size. So I don't know how much of a real threat that is. This Crusader army is not going anywhere. Crusader armies don't demobilize. They're allowed to siege as long as they like. On the other side, they've taken a lot of attrition losses, so they've most of those units are at partial strength. The Fatimids played a battering ram here, and that would have reduced the siege value by 2, the resistance by 2, which is pretty impressive. But the Crusaders, well, the Jerusalem kingdom, had Greek fire, which cancels it and gives them a replacement card, which changes a defensive card perhaps into an offensive card. I'm not sure. Yep, looks like it. And that'll allow a blockade if need be. More likely to be used here. Baldwin managed to break through at Damascus, taking it. That clears the marker there. Changes the victory points. It's now at 24 to 11 again. Crusaders are very close to being able to get a victory here. I forgot about something. The blockades, as long as it's not a port, you get an automatic chance, and they probably would have had one anyway, but I played the card to take it. I'm not sure what else I would have done with it. Anyway, we're at the end of the turn. I'm going to redeploy forces, demobilize where necessary, and see what happens. Forces demobilized. This was an entirely Crusader and 1 Hospitaller stack. Everything else, well, Baldwin's gone back to the box. He didn't want to stay in Damascus, but he did leave his units there to help defend it. He's allowed to do that. The way he's looking at things, he's not sure what he's valuable for at this point. He's a good leader, but there's nothing near him to take. So really the Crusader goal at this point is Aleppo. We're going to move into the last turn of the game, actually. You know, that's what it really comes down to. The Fatimid army couldn't stay. It only stays on a 1. Here's the problem. The Muslim player kind of wants one of his leaders back. Zengi, for example, who's pretty decent. He doesn't really need the Damascus leader. But he's got to give a card up to get him. Maybe more than 1, I don't remember. Those will be cards that'll make this a much easier siege to resolve. On the other hand, what can he do? Without a leader, he's really left with nothing. And I'll load this one up, and yeah, there's probably enough time to do another turn on it. But I'll keep these short.